Welcome everybody, thank you guys for tuning in. We have got a review on the Norco Range C1. This is a bike we've been getting a lot of questions from you guys about. And as much as we would have liked to have had this thing out a little sooner, some due diligence was needed on our end. Basically, the issues that we were having with this bike were the rough and chattery feel. We had some ups and downs with this bike and a lot of conversations with Norco, a lot of part swapping, and finally, after many, many months, we are excited to conclude this long-term review and give you guys the best input we have on the new high pivot enduro bike from Norco. The Norco Range is a 170 millimeter front and rear travel, big mountain, enduro, park, whatever you want to call it, high pivot bike, 29-inch wheeled spec. We've got the C1 version, which has the Fox factory suspension. It has a SRAM X01 Eagle drivetrain, WeAre1 Composites Union wheels, and basically a whole lot of really nice components on this bike. First up, let's get into the geometry real quickly. I know you guys can check that on the site, so we won't go too in depth, but so Norco obviously has been at the forefront of their ride-align and size-specific geo settings. So on the size large, which we are testing, this bike has a 480 millimeter reach, a 63.25 degree head tube angle, and a 77 degree seat tube angle. The seat tube angle will change depending on the size of the bike to kind of keep the rider's center of gravity in that ride-aligned triangle that Norco has worked so hard to develop in a nice, effective, and confident position. So it is a fairly long bike, and with that lengthening rear end, it only gets longer, and that's something we'll get into a little bit more in the ride impressions. As you might have seen in that little clip earlier, we were not in love with this bike at first. It was beautiful. We loved the bike. We were very excited to ride it, and it just very quickly started polarizing riders one by one by one. It was feeling harsh. It was feeling really rough. The chatter was just so much. We worked with Norco to get a Sprindex spring so we could try and change the spring rates from 450 all the way to 500 pounds. As you know, most of our testers are 165 to 175 pounds. We were well within that range, but we just could not find the right spot. Wrongly, I got to admit, thought that the culprit was the WeAre1 wheels on there that were making it so stiff. We thought maybe it was the really stiff handlebars. We swapped so many parts on this bike, and it wasn't until we had our final call with Norco where we just said, like, maybe it's the shock that's blown, and that's why we're just having this less than desirable ride experience. It was winning Bike of the Year, it was winning all these other awards, and we were just like, what are we doing wrong here? So we got a new shock. As we were replacing the shock, we pulled out that little shock extension dog bone, you could call it, I guess. And upon doing so, we discovered that the bearings in that extension were not moving. They were so stiff, like you couldn't even turn them by hand. And we reached back out to Norco. They said, well, send the shock back anyways. We'll do a bleed and put it on the dyno to check it, make sure it has the right tune and everything's looking good in there, but we'll also send you a new extension. Sure enough, Norco sent the new shock and the new shock extension little dog bone there, and we went back out, handed the bike off without really telling anybody what we did, what we changed about it, and wouldn't you know it, every single rider said, it feels like a different bike. What happened? We're very happy to report that we're no longer taking crazy bills. This bike actually rides pretty dang well when everything is working right. Now, that being said, that thing went bad. I don't know if it was bad instantly or went bad just after the first couple of rides, but that durability issue on those bearings is something to note, because there may be riders out there who may not be as in tune or have ridden as many different bikes who could just walk away thinking this bike kind of sucked, frankly, and didn't perform very well because of hardware not working. So I think, whatever happened there, I don't know if it was a QC issue or what it might have been, but it's worth noting, if your bike's not feeling the way you think it should, take some time, right? I mean, it's a pain to get this shock in and out, and that is one of our complaints about this bike. Like, that is not a very easy system to get into, to move, to adjust the shock, to swap springs. It is time consuming and kind of a pain, but I guess that is what it is. But more specifically, getting into the ride characteristics. Pedaling, first off, not great. 170 mil bike, high pivot bike, it is what it is, right? This isn't a bike that you're buying with the priority being climbing performance. That being said, it's slow, it takes up some energy, it's loud, you feel like you gotta work harder to get this thing up the hill. It'll get there, absolutely. And if you're not in a rush and you're not worried about, getting that Strava KOM on the hill climb, probably not gonna be an issue for you. That being said, there are bikes in the category that climb a little bit better, and significantly better, depending on the bike. The trade-off is some of the performance advantages you get on the downhill, which is where this bike is designed to shine. One other thing we will say with the climbing and pedaling of this bike, you may notice that we don't have a We Are One composites rear wheel on the back right now. We had that set up with the Onyx hub, and we were noticing a lot of misshifting, or ghost shifting, I should say, especially under power and when hitting in little compressions. The bike would just jump and skip gear, and we swapped the wheel out and weren't having that issue anymore. If I recall, Norco said that there may have been some issues with cable routing that they're working on adjusting to change that angle a little bit in the derailleur to put a little less tension or stress on that derailleur. But when we swapped the wheel out and eliminated, I guess, maybe that little bit of play that's in that driver hub or hub body, it went away. We weren't having that issue any longer. So we have noticed other reviewers having some issues with getting the shifting right, or just getting it to feel super precise and sharp. And that is something that we also had an issue with. All right, so efficiency, climbing, shifting out of the way. Descending. Without a doubt, this bike is built to charge, go fast, plow over big, nasty, gnarly bumps. It does that with ease. We took this out on everything from kind of mellower, smoother downhills to full-on bike park downhill laps, places that we've shuttled, DH bikes for years and are very familiar with how a bike should perform there. And this thing just absolutely charges. It's right up there with the best of them when it comes to descending. Now, a couple areas that we noticed some of the drawbacks of the rear suspension design and especially that lengthening rear end. So as you probably can tell, there's a lot of lava rock here in Bend, Oregon. So there's a lot of slower speed drops where the takeoffs are not smooth, right? It's not a piece of wood or a smooth rock slab. There's holes and crevices and cracks in that takeoff. And what we found regularly happening on this and the GT, and to a lesser extent the Cannondale, pretty much all the high pivot bikes we've ridden, is that rear end gets longer, and there is, a theory and an advantage to that, right, as you're going over bumps. But once your front tire goes off of a drop and that rear wheel extends, or essentially finds that hole in the drop-off surface, the rear wheel stays put in that hole, and the front, your body and the front of the bike continue to go straight for a split second before that wheel moves into that forward part of its arc. That moment is just enough at slow enough speeds to throw you forward and have that front end drop a little bit. And again, after doing it, not just on this bike, but on 2 other high pivot bikes, we realized that it wasn't the bike's fault, but in fact the suspension design's fault. So if you're someone who's regularly riding kind of more of those old school little half pedal drops where your back tire might get caught in that hole, or you're regularly going off slow speed drops, beware that there is going to be a split second where if that rear wheel finds a crack or a hole, it's going to just shift you forward a little bit. Not a deal breaker, but again, if that's something that you're riding all the time, you're going to want to make note, because it is a little bit disconcerting when that happens, right? When you go off of a 6-foot drop at a relatively slow speed and you give that normal little pop that you need, and then all of a sudden the front end starts dropping because that rear wheel's still hanging up and then it comes off, it's a little unnerving. So that's kind of one of our only real major downsides, I guess, or criticisms of that lengthening rear end. Obviously in corners or in maybe some smaller like jump situations, it could be an issue for you there, but we didn't notice a big, huge drawback that would really be worth mentioning other than that slow speed drop scenario. So 63.25 degree head tube angle. It's a slack, long travel, big bike, right? So it's gonna come with the downsides of a long slack bike, meaning very tight, flat terrain, steep climbs and switchbacks. You know, you're gonna have to fight the bike a little bit for the trade-off of stability, confidence, and handling on all-out downhills at speed and on very steep terrain, which is what a 170 mil enduro bike is built for, to be honest. So final impressions of this bike, I would say, are way better than we thought they were going to be initially, and we're very happy about that. It was a little frustrating, and we were just so unsure as to what we were doing wrong with this bike. And it's great that this thing turned around and changed all of our minds. So if you're looking for a bike and you want to prioritize, you know, shuttling, maybe some bike parking with some backcountry adventures or some, you know, self-pedaled downhill runs, and getting to the top isn't your #1 priority, this is a pretty solid option. It is an absolute beast, right? It's a lot of bike, it's a lot of travel, but holy moly, when you let this thing eat, it will go. And for the riders that are looking to do that, might be one of the best, if not the best option out there. Either way, I think it's worth getting out and pedaling and climbing on one. You can take our word that the downhill performance is gonna be great. The bigger thing for you guys is gonna be to find out if you're willing to pedal this thing around. So get out, try to pedal one of these if you can. Thank you guys once again for watching this video. Thank you to Norco for bearing with us. This took a lot longer than we all wanted it to, but we are very stoked that we turned this thing around with some new hardware, new shock extension, and a new shock. So once again, thank you guys all for watching. It would mean a ton if you guys just hit that subscribe button, left a comment down below with what you think of the video and what you'd like to see more of in the future. Thank you guys very much, and we hope to see you out on the trails.